The old house stood on a hill, dark and silent. Its windows, like empty eyes, stared out into the gathering dusk, as if watching, waiting. It dared them to come closer. The air around it seemed to hum with an unspoken challenge, a whisper that beckoned the brave and the foolish alike. Max, Sarah, Ben and Chloe whispered among themselves. They knew they shouldn't be here. The stories about this place were enough to keep most people away. But Max had found something, a book. It was hidden under a loose floorboard in the attic of his grandmother's house, covered in dust and cobwebs. He said it held a secret, a dark secret that promised to reveal the unknown, to bring excitement to their otherwise mundane lives. A way to summon something ancient and powerful. They were just teenagers, caught between the innocence of childhood and the responsibilities of adulthood, bored in a town where nothing ever happened, looking for a thrill, a way to break the monotony. Max opened the book with trembling hands. Its pages were yellow and brittle, as if they might crumble to dust at any moment. The air grew colder as he turned each page. The writing, strange and faded, seemed to shift and change under their gaze. It was written in a language none of them could understand. This was a bad idea, Sarah thought. Her heart pounded in her chest, a drumbeat of fear and anticipation. But she didn't say a word. The thrill of the unknown, the peer pressure, and the desire to be part of something extraordinary kept her silent. She watched as Max continued to read aloud, his voice barely a whisper, yet it seemed to echo in the stillness of the night. The words he spoke felt heavy, laden with a power they couldn't comprehend. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and sending a shiver down their spines. They were on the brink of something, teetering on the edge of a precipice, and there was no turning back now. The book was called The Book of Shadows. Max read the words aloud, his voice echoed in the silence. The ritual was simple, a circle of salt, candles, a chant in a language they didn't understand. Ben laughed.
You really think this will work?
Chloe shivered. The air felt heavy, cold, but Max was already drawing the circle on the dusty floor. He placed the candles. His eyes gleamed with excitement. He began to chant. The words felt strange on his tongue, powerful. The candle flames flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the room. The air was thick with anticipation, each teenager holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. The room was silent except for the occasional crackle of the candle wicks, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Shadows danced on the walls, creating ghostly figures that seemed to move with a life of their own. The air grew colder, sending shivers down their spines. It was as if the room itself was alive, breathing and watching them. The sense of unease was palpable, and the teenagers exchanged nervous glances. Sarah felt a knot of fear in her stomach. Something wasn't right. The chanting grew louder, faster. The words were ancient, foreign, and filled with a power that made her skin crawl. She glanced at her friends, their faces illuminated by the flickering candlelight, and saw the same fear reflected in their eyes. They had started this ritual as a game, but now, it felt all too real. The room pulsed with an unseen energy, a force that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. Chloe closed her eyes, trying to block out the overwhelming sensation. She could feel the energy coursing through her, making her heart race and her breath quicken. It was as if the room was a living entity, feeding off their fear and excitement. She wished they had never come here. The regret was a heavy weight in her chest. Then, it happened. The air shimmered, distorting the space around them. It was like looking through a heat haze, but colder, more sinister. The shimmer grew stronger, and Chloe could feel the presence of something otherworldly pressing in on them. A high-pitched whine filled the room, piercing their ears and making them wince. It was a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a noise that was both alien and familiar. The teenagers clutched at their ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was relentless, growing louder and more insistent. The book fell from Max's hands, hitting the floor with a dull thud. It was the book that had started all of this, filled with strange symbols and incantations. Max had found it in an old, dusty attic, and they had thought it would be fun to try one of the rituals. Now, as the book lay open on the floor, the symbols seemed to glow with an eerie light. His eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Something was coming through, something ancient and evil. The air was thick with a sense of impending doom, and Max could feel the presence growing stronger. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart, and whatever was on the other side was about to break through. The teenagers huddled together, their fear palpable as they waited for the inevitable. A figure began to form, tall and skeletal. Its eyes glowed with an eerie red light. Claws sprouted from its fingertips. They dripped with a black ooze. The teenagers gasped. They stumbled back in terror. This was not what they expected. The creature smiled, a horrifying skeletal grin. Its voice was a raspy whisper.
"You have summoned me. Now you will face the consequences."
The teenagers were paralyzed with fear. Their blood ran cold. What had they done? Max stammered. He tried to speak, to apologize, but no words came out. The creature took a step closer. Its burning gaze swept over them. They were trapped, like mice before a snake. Chloe screamed. She couldn't help it. The sound seemed to amuse the creature. It threw back its head and let out a chilling laugh. The laughter echoed through the house, bouncing off the walls, amplifying their terror. There was no escape. "We have to do something," Sarah yelled. Her voice trembled. She grabbed the Book of Shadows, flipping through the pages frantically, searching for a way to reverse the ritual, to send the creature back. But the words swam before her eyes. Ben backed away, his eyes darting around the room, looking for any way out. But the creature blocked the door. Its eyes followed their every move. They were trapped with a being of pure evil. Their carefree adventure had turned into a nightmare. Max saw his chance. He pushed past the creature, racing towards the stairs. The others hesitated for a moment, then they followed, their fear giving them speed. They could hear the creature's enraged roar behind them. It was gaining on them. They burst out of the house and into the night. The cool air stung their lungs, but they didn't stop. They couldn't stop. Not while that thing was after them. They ran until their legs burned, until they could run no more. Nowhere to hide. They collapsed in the woods, gasping for breath. Hidden among the trees, they listened for any sound of the creature. But there was only silence, the silence of the night, and their own ragged breathing. Were they safe? Max shook his head. "It's not over," he whispered. "I can feel it. It's still out there." He was right. The evil they had unleashed was not so easily contained. It was loose in their world, and it was hungry. A town in terror. The next morning the town awoke to a different kind of fear. Animals were found slaughtered, their bodies twisted at unnatural angles. People whispered about strange noises in the night, shadows that seemed to move on their own. The teenagers knew the truth. They had seen the evil firsthand, but who would believe them? They were just kids who had made a terrible mistake, a mistake that could cost them everything. The price of curiosity. They tried to warn people, but their words fell on deaf ears. The creature was cunning. It hid in the shadows, preying on the unsuspecting, spreading fear and chaos. The town was being consumed by the darkness they had unleashed. They were living their worst nightmare, hunted by a creature they didn't understand, haunted by the consequences of their actions. The price of their curiosity was proving to be higher than they could have ever imagined. A shadow remains. Days turned into weeks. The once vibrant town was now shrouded in an ever-present gloom. The sun seemed reluctant to rise, casting long, eerie shadows that danced menacingly across the landscape. The air was thick with an unspoken dread, a palpable tension that gripped the hearts of every resident. The fear in the town grew stronger. Whispers of the unknown creature spread like wildfire, each tale more terrifying than the last. Parents held their children close, and doors were bolted shut long before nightfall. The once bustling streets were now deserted, save for the occasional flicker of movement in the shadows. The teenagers were living on borrowed time. Every tick of the clock echoed their growing anxiety. They felt the weight of the town's fear pressing down on them, knowing that they were the only ones who could confront the darkness. Their nights were sleepless, filled with nightmares that blurred the line between reality and terror. They knew they had to do something. Gathering in secret, they pored over maps and old texts, searching for any clue that might give them an edge. Their resolve hardened with each passing day, their bond growing stronger as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. They were no longer just teenagers, they were warriors in the making. They had to find a way to stop the creature before it was too late. The abandoned building held secrets, its walls whispering of past horrors. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind seemed to mock their efforts. but they pressed on, driven by a determination that burned brighter than their fear, for them and for everyone else. The weight of their mission was heavy, but they carried it with a fierce sense of duty. They knew that failure was not an option. The storm clouds above mirrored the turmoil within their hearts, but they stood united, ready to face whatever came their way. They returned to the old house, the Book of Shadows in hand. The house, with its creaking doors and flickering lights, seemed to breathe with a life of its own. The Book of Shadows, ancient and mysterious, was their only hope. Its pages, filled with cryptic symbols and forgotten spells, held the key to their salvation. This time they were prepared to face the consequences of their actions, to right their wrongs. They had made mistakes before, but now they were wiser, more cautious. Each spell they read, each incantation they practiced, brought them closer to the final showdown. Their eyes met, a silent promise passing between them. They would not fail. But the shadow of the ancient evil loomed large. It was a presence that could be felt, a darkness that seemed to seep into their very souls. The creature, with its malevolent gaze and sinister intentions, was always one step ahead. It thrived on their fear, growing stronger with each passing moment. And they knew that their fight had just begun. The battle ahead would be long and arduous, filled with dangers they could scarcely imagine. But they were ready. With hearts full of courage and minds sharp with determination, they stepped into the unknown, ready to face the darkness, head on. Their journey was far from over, but they were no longer afraid. They were the town's last hope, and they would not let it down.